So hi everybody, my name is David Joyner. I'm from Georgia Tech, which is where you all would have been a couple months ago if the world hadn't ended. So I'm going to present a paper called The Synchronicity Paradox in Online Education that was co-authored by my colleagues Qiaosi, Wang, Suyash, Thakare, Shan, Jing, Ashok, Goel, and Blair, MacIntyre. And I'll lead with a spoiler. So what the Synchronicity Paradox is, it's my attempt to write a paper that sounds like it's a Tom Clancy novel, but also it's the observation that many learners require the flexibility of asynchronous remote classes to be able to attend and enroll, but crave synchronous interaction with classmates and teachers for learning and connection. And I lead with that because I think it's an intuitive idea. When I present it to people, usually the reaction I get is, well, yeah, naturally. So why'd you write a paper about it? Well, because I can. For our context that we did this research actually in, I work in our online remote asynchronous semester-based Master of Science Computer Science program. Very affordable tuition, $7,500 for the entire program. I mentioned this because I know we have a much bigger community this year. I don't know how many people have a background in this. I also don't know how many of our students are here right now. I think it's about 30 of our students. So I'm actually really excited to have this be online this year because it means a lot more of my friends get to attend. And some early research in the program found that nearly all students in our program, if they could not attend our program, had no other option. It was this or nothing. And you read that paper from the folks at Harvard to find details on that. That's probably changed a little bit because since we launched and since that research was done, a lot more programs like this have launched. So nowadays, I think it would probably be, if it wasn't for programs like us and the edX Masters and the Coursera Master's degrees, students wouldn't otherwise be choosing an on-campus program. Our methodology here is kind of interesting. There were actually 3 studies we did here at Georgia Tech in parallel and largely in vacuums. So I was involved in all 3, but for 2 of them, I was more opening up the opportunity than actively involved on a day-to-day basis. And the 3rd I ran. And they were all investigating different things, and they all found evidence that pointed to this central underlying idea, which I found interesting because it was kind of an emergent replication kind of thing, not replication of the methodology, but finding the same kind of thing in very different contexts. So I'm going to present those findings as well as some other findings that just came out of those studies that are not themselves large enough to be presented on their own, but that are I think, novel and interesting. Our first study was a survey-based examination of social presence in online classes. We went out to students and directly said, how present do you feel? Basically, we used an established inventory for it, but we wanted to understand their own experience and how it changed over time. And what we found was that students generally felt comfortable online, but not connected to classmates in a very strong sense. So it wasn't an issue of, I don't feel secure interacting online, I'm embarrassed, I'm scared. It was just kind of, yeah, I'm comfortable with it, but what I get out of it isn't a strong sense of connection. We found that women in our program were more interested in connecting with peers. And may have had a little bit more difficulty than others actually executing that connection, although only the first difference is statistically significant. Interesting note is that our ratio of women has been rising as the program has continued. So we also found that older students report greater interest and less difficulty connecting with peers, which is counter what I had hypothesized initially. I thought it would be the opposite, that people who grew up in the social media era would have a greater comfort. I think what we actually see is that younger audiences feel a little bit more insecure connecting with others in this online environment because so many of their peers in the classes are so much more experienced that there's kind of a intimidation factor there. For our second study, it was a need-finding study actually from a student who wanted to develop an interface for facilitating community in online courses. So what he did was he went out and found out, why don't you feel a sense of community and what can we do about it? And what he found was that nearly half of students reported feeling a sense of isolation in the online program, which is lower than I feared, higher than I hoped, but lower than I feared. But what was particularly interesting there was that 89% of them actually reported they wanted to connect more, even though half of that were actually reported feeling isolated. So there's this sense of, I don't feel alone, but I still want to make more connections. I want to network more. I want to make more relationships. And a lot of it was specifically not in the context of particular classes. So what we find is that students very often report, I did a group project in one class, I got really connected, really great friends with my group mates there, or a couple people I hooked up with in a particular class that we had our own little study group. But then we went and took different classes and that relationship broke. And so they want things that go beyond individual classes, I think is a problem we often face in online education is we often put the class as the first class object, when in reality, in the traditional college program, it's the campus that comes first. And then you take classes once you join the campus community. Pardon my cats if you see them wrestling in the background. They always know when I'm presenting to 100 people and they decide that's the time to play. And actually, we found more evidence for that as well. As students take more classes in the program, their sense of isolation actually grows, which is counter to what we would think for two reasons. We might think more time, more relationships. So as they progress in the program, they feel more connected. Or we might think people who feel connected are more likely to persist, which would be a very natural hypothesis. I actually see the exact opposite. And the numbers that you see on those dots are actually the number of respondents for each option. And so we actually see as they go on, this very strong relationship, they feel more isolated. It could also be that the students who joined the program 3 years ago, there was something different about that cohort and they were more likely to feel isolated. And as we've gone more mainstream, maybe we've gotten more students who don't default to online experience or something like that. But I tend to think there's something more causal there about that. We also, and aiding the lending itself to its evidence to the synchronicity paradox itself, what we found was that over half of students say it's not important to meet their peers face-to-face to actually feel connected. But only 9% said it's not important to meet them synchronously. So there's a preference there that I can, interact with y'all just like this and feel connected to you, even though we're all over the world. But if we're not live like this, if we're, entirely doing our communication via asynchronous mechanisms, we won't feel quite as connected. We also found that there's a strong tendency to feel more intimidated sharing an asynchronous forum than in a synchronous environment because of the kind of implicit transientness of a synchronous chat tool that, I'm chatting to whoever's here right now, as opposed to a post is, hey, 500 people in my class, look at my stupid question. So people feel more intimidated in that asynchronous environment, which I feel like has a disparate effect on the people who likely need the connection the most because they don't have that sense of belonging. Our third study was actually a test for different tools for classroom integration, synchronous class interaction, I should say. One was a chat tool that would let students chat with classmates while attending pre-recorded lectures. So to bring back kind of the synchronous feel of we're all here together, watching this content together, perhaps with the teaching assistant as well. And then one was actually a virtual reality environment in Mozilla Hubs to basically have a virtual reality sort of lecture hall and put students in that environment to recreate some of that peripheral community that you might get in person, where even if we don't directly interact, just knowing that there are other people here with me at the same time can lend itself to that. What we found was that these students additionally said they need to be able to interact with their classmates and they want to interact more than they presently do. And what I found interesting was that 84% of our participants in our virtual lecture hall environment said they intended to do it again, even though they also said, I'm going to need to go back and watch this lecture again on my own. So there's something there. I didn't get the entire lecture the way I would if I was just watching it by myself, but I still want to do this again. So there's something in that mix. We also found that the students who used our synchronous chat tool reported a greater sense of connection than those who used an asynchronous email kind of control condition, and the virtual reality one, which I think is the friction of the heavier technology. I think a lot of time was spent figuring out how you use this tool as opposed to interacting more naturally with classmates. What's notable about this study also is that the students weren't aware of what the others were doing. So they were just asked to report their level of connectedness with their peers to this environment, not to say, I think I felt more engaged in the chat tool than the virtual reality tool. You can see more about the methodology for all those in the paper. So to revisit the synchronicity paradox as stated, was that students do require this flexibility to be able to enroll in these programs in the first place, but they still want that synchronous interaction. They don't necessarily need it. They still feel, to a certain extent, not that isolated, at least a decent number don't feel isolated, but they still want that out of their course experience. The resolution we pose to it is that when you get to scale, you can actually reintroduce flexible or emergent synchronicity. And this is where I hope we see more work in the future. in our classes, for example, we'll have 500 or 600 students in a class, and the class requires 15 hours a week of work. So no matter when you are, if we even just distribute that perfectly randomly, anytime you're working on the class, there's 60 other people around the world working on it at the exact same time as you. Can we create emergent groups out of that audience to help you feel like you have a classroom cohort without telling you have to show up at 10 a.m. in Atlanta, Monday, Wednesday, Friday? Or can we do a better job of facilitating finding those relationships yourself with those people who are going to have the same kind of schedule as you, same kind of constraints, who can supply that synchronous interaction? Or can we actually use this to reintroduce some of the more structured synchronicity and say, all right, we have 600 students. That means we're going to offer sections 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 9 a.m., 3 days a week. Sign up for the one you want. There'll be a teaching assistant there to work with you through the session. So you have a more synchronous class experience, but you're not forced to commit to a very limiting one that doesn't likely work with your work life, work with your family life, everything like that. So that's what I have. I think I managed to stay 3 minutes short as well. Either that or I can't tell time. If you want to see more research about our program, there's our lab website, my website, the program website, or you're welcome to email me anytime. And somewhere I have a chat window, but it's disappeared. Oh, it's behind y'all. I have 2 minutes.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. Any questions for David? There's also lots going on in the chat if you want to address something you see in there. Otherwise, raise your hand if you have a question that you'd like to ask.
I'll scroll through a while. Oh, sure, Juliana.
Oh, okay. I'm unmuted. Ah, cool.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I have a question regarding to. So you were saying there's like 89% of people, students, they actually want to be connected, and 64% want to do some activities like aside from the classroom. Yeah. So I wonder, like, what type of connections they are seeking for, and what type of activities they are seeking for. Like, do you have any insight regarding to that? Yeah.
I have anecdotes, which are dangerous. We didn't ask specifically, or if we did, I don't remember the results off the top of my head, what kinds of outside of class relationships they were looking to form. I know from the kinds of self-organized student communities they form on their own, we see a lot in the area of networking, finding job opportunities. One of the things that's unique about our program is that we get students from all over the career pathway. And so my favorite stories are stories of students hiring classmates when they get to the end of the class and say, wow, Renee was always on Piazza, posting really helpful answers. What a great guy. I'm a hiring manager at my company. I'd like to hire you. We actually hear those stories fairly frequently. So we know a lot of them are around professional networking, job search kind of things. A lot of them are also around program support outside the class level. And this is at the forefront of my mind because we're in the middle of registration right now, which is a mess. Because how do you get 11,000 students into 40 classes when you don't know how big they can be? And they're looking for kind of the education of how to be in the program, how to get through the program in the kind of the procedural sense. How do you register? How do you make progress? How do you monitor your own progress? Things like that. So they're looking for stuff anchored to the program, but outside of the context of any particular class. And there's also lots of just general social groups, local groups, general interests. There's a pretty big e-gaming kind of social interest community. The same kind of things I think you'd find on college campuses of, we're all at Georgia Tech, we're, have all our different majors, but we like anime, so we have our anime club. I think that kind of thing we see a decent amount as well. So,
do I have a chance to ask a follow-up? Is that possible?
I'm pretty sure the people after me won't complain if I take another minute.
I just want to ask, like, how risky, how dangerous, or how beneficial actually to have like a social element embedded in like learning like environment? Like, is that? Oh, I was going to. My question is like, so we're kind of talking about people like aside from their learning needs, they also have social needs like among their peers. Like how beneficial or how risky that would actually be doing for the learning activities itself.
I think that it's interesting in this context. I think that I don't really see any, there are obviously risks, I think, especially in the online environment in terms of equity, although we're at the graduate level, which means we sidestep many of the issues for better or for worse. I think the benefits, especially at this level, you see, it's kind of the same as the resolution synchronicity paradox of, even if you are for whatever however you're segmenting the population, a relative minority in that population based on interest, based on demographics, based on life experience. At our scale, you're going to find other people with similar interests, similar backgrounds, things like that. And so I think the major opportunity is in forming those connections and helping people actually find those who will be those social connections. I don't know if that quite answers the question, but it's the first thing that comes to mind for me.